Hello, it's Grandma Karen. You know what a good stitch and a bad stitch look like now. Today we are going to learn to wind the bobbin. We will be talking about the Bernina 802. Let's talk a little about thread. We will talk more about thread in several other lessons. I found that some beginners are frustrated when they try to find the start of the thread on a new spool of thread. These two spools have a slit where the beginning of the thread is. I call it the thread tail. On the left thread, the tail is in the slit. With the right thread, I have to peel the paper label back a little to see the slit. If the slit is hard to see, use a marker to make the slit easier to find. When you take the thread off the machine to put it away, this slit is where you can park the thread tail to keep the threads from getting tangled. We will talk about other ways to find the thread tail in another lesson. Before the thread goes onto the spool pin, you may have to pierce the paper label to find the hole. You could just tear the paper off, but there is often useful information on the label, so I don't usually tear it off. Instead, I use a small pair of scissors or a metal nail file and punch a hole in the paper at each end of the spool. Spools of thread come in lots of sizes and shapes. We are going to look closely at the way thread is wound onto spools. The threads in this photo are called stacked threads. The threads form a kind of stack like a smokestack. It is wound onto the spool one row on top of the next row. The rows go up the spool and then back down the spool. Stacked spools need to spin while you are sewing. Look at this ribbon. If I pull from the side of the spool, it comes off straight. If I pull the ribbon from the top or the bottom of the spool, the ribbon begins to twist and twist with each round that it comes off. If the stacked thread is coming from the side, like this spool right here, then it is not getting twisted. It is just staying straight as it goes, and that will give you good tension. It needs to spin when it's coming off the spool. These spools have the thread round around the spool in a different way. The thread crosses over itself diagonally each time it goes around the spool. This is called cross-wound thread. The thread needs to come off the top of the spool so it doesn't twist. It is opposite from stacked thread. The thread does not spin, it just comes off the top. So why do we need to know the difference between these two kinds of thread spools? Because we need to put the spool of thread on the correct spool pin so that it unwinds the correct way. Remember that there are two different spool pins, horizontal and vertical. Some machines, like this one, have both kinds. Some machines only have a vertical and others only have a horizontal spool pin. Stacked thread goes on the vertical spool pin so it can spin around without getting twisted. For some spools, it may make a difference if the spool is spinning clockwise or counterclockwise. Follow the diagrams in your machine's guidebook. Cross-wound threads go on the horizontal spool pin so it can pull off the top of the spool. This stitch note is to help reinforce this principle. If you are having problems with bad stitches or breaking threads, try to follow this. Stacked thread does best on the vertical spool pin. Cross-wound thread does best on the horizontal spool pin. Your sewing machine has two threads. One is called the top thread. It comes from a spool of thread. The other is called the bobbin thread. This is a bobbin. A bobbin will hold a lot of thread, but eventually it will run out and you will have to put thread on it again. This bobbin goes into a bobbin case and then into your machine. You must use Bernina bobbins. Get them from your Bernina dealer. Other bobbins may look similar, but they're not going to be an exact fit. Bernina has several types of bobbins. Your machine takes the silver bobbin. The brown arrow is pointing to your type of bobbin, the bobbin that came with your machine. The blue arrow points to the newer version of the silver bobbin. If you buy new bobbins, they will look like this. Both fit your machine perfectly. Here's a stitch note to help you remember something important. It says, using the wrong bobbin in your machine can cause bad stitches, bad tension, and cause thread jams. Your machine has two vertical spool pins. Your manual calls them reel holder pins. I will call them spool pins. Your machine does not have horizontal spool pins. We will talk about them in a few minutes. I'm putting my stacked thread here on this spool pin. So right now I have this so that the thread is coming from the front of the spool. I need to turn this over because for this machine it needs to be coming from the back of the thread. So you're going to go from your spool to the pre-tension stud right here. You're going to go in front of it and then it goes around the back. And as you do that, these two threads are going to cross over each other. This pretension disc makes the thread going to the bobbin winder have the same amount of tightness the whole time that the bobbin is winding. We learned about tension in our last lesson. As you bring the thread over to the bobbin, the thread should cross over itself right there, and you're going to put the bobbin on this bobbin winder spindle, and with your hand you're going to wrap some thread around the bobbin like this. Make sure that tail is all the way in there. You're going to go around 4 or 5 times. I went around a few more times than that. The newer bobbins have a rough edge inside, which will help the thread grip the bobbin. We need to do one more thing. We have to loosen the hand wheel release. You're going to hold the outer part of the hand wheel with the left hand, and you're going to hold it tight so it doesn't move. And with your right hand, you're going to turn this inner wheel towards you or towards the front of the machine. See how it's loose now? If it's really tight, then you might need your mentor to help loosen it. Loosening this inner wheel lets the bobbin winder spin around, and it also makes the needle so that it doesn't go up and down. Make sure your thread is still wrapped around the pretension stud correctly. Push this bobbin over like this towards this white stop right here, and you're going to press down on your foot control. And you don't want to press too hard. You don't want to go really fast. And see how it's spinning around, and there's thread going on, winding onto the bobbin. This will automatically go like this and pop over when this bobbin is full. If you want to stop like I just did before it's full, all you have to do is push this over to the side. Then you're going to tighten your hand wheel again. And you're going to take some scissors and you're going to cut your thread. This photo is a close-up of the threading path from the vertical spool pin. I marked it with a marker. Maybe this will be a little easier to see. Your guidebook also has a good picture of this path. There's also a close-up of the pretension stud. It has an arrow engraved in the metal to show you the direction the thread should be going. Your machine does not have a horizontal spool pin. You can put your cross-wound thread on the vertical spool pin on your machine. It may work just fine, especially for winding the bobbin. It is not ideal. If you are finding that your thread breaks or your stitches are not forming well, then try using a thread stand like one of these for your cross-wound threads. This simple stand has a loop at the top. Put your thread here, and then you're going to loop this through here. And you're going to move the stand around here or move it over here, however you need to, so that it feeds in here correctly. And you're just going to go around your bobbin pretension the same way that you would if it was on here. And that makes it so that the thread is coming off the top of the thread in the proper way for cross-wound threads. This type of spool stand can be used for several different things and can be put on its side or standing up like this. There's a metal lined hole that's right here that I put the thread through, and then it goes into this guide right here. Then it's going to go over to the pretension disc. But you're going to be moving this around some way. Move the arm up and down, move this so that the thread is moving in there smoothly and evenly. Here are some photos of those two thread stands. I have drawn the thread path with a marker. Maybe this is easier to see. What does a well-wound bobbin look like? This top photo shows you. The thread is even from top to bottom. It looks tight. The bottom photo shows what happens if the thread is not around the pretension stud correctly. The thread is not stacked evenly and it's mushy on the bobbin, or it's loose and stringy. You cannot use a bobbin like this in your machine. It will have terrible stitches. If you don't have the thread wrapped around the bobbin correctly, it may wind onto the bobbin winder stud instead of around the bobbin. Stop winding the bobbin if you see this happening. Push the bobbin to the left, take the bobbin off, and unwind the thread that is wound incorrectly and start again. This probably won't happen if you wind the bobbin correctly, but it is a good reminder. Trim off any threads sticking up on the bobbin or going over the edge. They can interfere with the bobbin and can also cause bad stitches. Here's another stitch note to help you remember. For better stitches, cut off the thread tails close to the bobbin. Do not have thread wrapping over the edge of the bobbin. It is time for your homework. Show your mentor that you can do the following things. 1. Show or describe the difference between cross-wound and stacked threads. 2. Use the red felt under the thread on your spool pin. If you are using cross-wound thread, use a thread stand if you have one. 3. Try to go slower when winding the bobbin. 4. Properly wind the bobbin. In our next lesson, we're going to learn to thread the top of the machine and put the bobbin into the machine. See you next time. And here's a note for the mentor. In our next lesson, you will need thread, a bobbin with thread on it, and the sewing machine. We will learn to thread the top of the machine and learn to thread the bobbin. Have the guidebook handy and it will be helpful. See the mentor's note from lesson 6 for thread recommendations. Thank you for helping someone learn to sew.